This is a real recording. It was captured on February 2nd, 1961, by two brothers in a converted Nazi bunker outside Turin, Italy. The Soviet Union said nothing had launched that night. No mission, no spacecraft, no cosmonaut. The breathing disagrees. The man who recorded that breathing was named Achille Giudica Cordiglia, 28 years old. Medical student at the University of Turin by day, space radio operator by night. On the night of February 2nd, 1961, before Yuri Gagarin had ever left the ground, Achille heard something through his headphones that made him pick up the telephone and call his professor. At 11 o'clock at night, the professor he called was one of Italy's leading cardiologists. After listening to the recording, the professor said 6 words. "This is the heart of a dying man." By the end of this video, you'll understand why that statement is both more credible and more complicated than it sounds, and why the most disturbing part of the story has nothing to do with the recordings at all. The story begins a decade earlier. In 1949, Achille and Gian Giudica Cordiglia spent their pocket money on surplus U.S. Army radio equipment, 5 cents a pound from a military salvage market. With it, they built a receiving station in their bedroom. By 1957, they had moved to Turin and upgraded to something more serious, a disused German military bunker on the city's edge. They called it Torre Bear. The antennae were chicken wire and plumbing pipe. The recording equipment was scavenged and modified. Everything was self-taught. 2 brothers, a Nazi bunker, salvage parts, and then, on October 4th, 1957, the radio changed everything. Sputnik, the Soviet Union, had launched the first artificial satellite in human history. The broadcast included its transmission frequency. Achille reached over, tuned the dial. 2 amateur kids in a repurposed bunker, listening to a machine in space. They were hooked. Over the next 2 years, they tracked Sputnik 2, the irregular heartbeat of Laika, the space dog. They received Explorer 1, America's first satellite. They built a network of listening stations they called Zeus, connecting operators across Europe. By 1960, the Giudica Cordiglia brothers were arguably the most capable civilian space monitoring operation in the world. Which is why, on November 28, 1960, what they heard next stopped them cold. The Bochum Radio Observatory in West Germany had detected signals on Soviet satellite frequencies and broadcast the news. Achille tuned in. What came through was not beeps. It was Morse code. The brothers calculated the velocity of the transmitting object. It was not orbiting Earth. It was on an escape trajectory, accelerating outward, away from the planet. No retro burn, no course correction. Whatever was sending that SOS was not coming back. The Soviets announced nothing. 3 months later, February 2nd, 1961, came the recording from the opening of this video, the breathing, the slowing heartbeat. Achille called his professor at 11 at night. 6 words back. "This is the heart of a dying man." The Soviet Union announced 2 days later that a spacecraft had burned up on re-entry. No crew mentioned, no mission name, no explanation. And then, May 1961, the 3rd recording. The most disturbing, a woman's voice, speaking Russian, fragmented, translating roughly, "I am hot. Isn't this dangerous? I am hot. I will re-enter." Then, a reference to flames. Then silence. The Soviet Union officially put a woman in space in June 1963. Valentina Tereshkova, celebrated, photographed, alive. This recording was from 1961. If authentic, a woman reached space 2 years before history recorded, and died there, and the Soviet Union erased it. Achille kept every recording, filed them, dated them, shared them with journalists across Europe. He genuinely believed what he had found. The question, the one that matters, is whether he was right, and the answer is more complicated than either his supporters or his critics will tell you. Let's start with the February 1961 recording, the one the cardiologist called the heart of a dying man. Here's the technical problem. In Soviet Vostok capsules, a cosmonaut's heartbeat was never transmitted as raw audio. It was encoded, embedded into a carrier signal, and sent back to Earth through a system specifically designed to transmit data back to mission control. Think of it like the difference between hearing a song on the radio and hearing the raw electrical signal the radio tower is actually broadcasting. They are completely different things. You need specific equipment to convert one into the other. The actual Vostok heartbeat signal looks like this, a tone with regular interruptions, not a heartbeat sound. A data signal, the Torre Bert recording, is an actual heartbeat. Audio, unencoded, direct sound. For that recording to be genuine, the Soviet spacecraft would have had to use a completely unique transmission system, one that appeared in no other Soviet mission before or after. Not impossible, but extraordinary. Now the SOS recording. The escape trajectory. For a spacecraft to accidentally end up on an escape trajectory, moving away from Earth fast enough to break gravity entirely, it would need enormous additional fuel. An engineer at the Swedish Space Corporation calculated that the spacecraft would have needed to carry more than twice its dry weight as propellant, over 13 tons in orbit. The rockets available to the Soviets in 1960 couldn't lift 13 tons to orbit. It's like claiming a car accidentally drove off a cliff and kept going upward. Except the car would have needed a rocket engine to do it. And there's no rocket engine in the car. And the woman's voice? The Bochum Observatory, the same station that had initially corroborated the SOS signal, investigated this transmission and concluded the signal had originated from the ground, not from orbit. Only Torre Bert believed it was from space. So the recordings are probably not what Achille believed they were. But here is where the story gets more interesting, not less, because the question was never really, are the recordings real? The real question is, was the Soviet Union hiding cosmonaut deaths? And the answer to that question, unlike the recordings, has documentary proof. This is a Soviet cosmonaut training photograph from the early 1960s. Count the people. Now look at the same photograph as it appeared in official Soviet publications. Someone has been removed, not because of image quality, not by accident, deliberately cut from the historical record, as if they had never stood there. His name was Valentin Bondarenko. He was 24 years old, a Soviet Air Force pilot, a cosmonaut trainee. On March 23, 1961, 20 days before Yuri Gagarin's historic flight, Bondarenko was in an isolation chamber completing a 10-day sensory deprivation test. Standard preparation. The chamber was pressurized with pure oxygen. Here's what pure oxygen does. In simple terms, it makes everything flammable. In normal air, fire needs time to spread. In a pure oxygen environment, it explodes. Bondarenko had finished a medical check. He peeled sensor pads from his skin, cleaned the adhesive off with an alcohol-soaked cotton ball. Then, without thinking, the way anyone would, he tossed it aside. It landed on a small heating coil. The chamber was on fire in seconds. The pressure inside made the door impossible to open immediately from the outside. By the time rescuers reached him, Bondarenko had third-degree burns covering most of his body. He died 7 hours later. He was 24 years old. The Soviet Union said nothing. They removed him from the photographs, They told his family to stay quiet. They issued no statement, held no ceremony, announced no death. The Western world did not learn his name until 1986, 25 years after he burned to death in that chamber. Bondarenko's story is not a theory. It is documented, verified. Officially acknowledged in 1986, when Soviet glasnost forced the archives partially open, which means the Soviet Union was absolutely capable of erasing a person from history. The question is not whether they did it. The question is, how many times? Bondarenko was not alone in the erasure. In 1960, 1 year before Gagarin, a Soviet rocket exploded on the launch pad at Baikonur. It is now called the Nedelin catastrophe, named after Marshal Mitrofan Nedelin, who was killed in the explosion. The Soviet Union estimated 78 people died that day. Some historians put the number higher. Nedelin, a 4-star military officer, one of the most powerful men in Soviet rocketry, was reported in state media to have died in a plane crash. The explosion happened in October 1960. The Soviet Union admitted it in 1989. 29 years of official silence over the deaths of dozens of people at a rocket facility. The pattern is consistent. The Soviets did not suppress minor embarrassments. They suppressed catastrophic ones. The threshold was not, did anyone die? It was, would this undermine our image of technological supremacy? So here is the architecture of the problem. The Giudica Cordiglia recordings are almost certainly not what Achille believed they were. The technical evidence is against them. But the cover-up apparatus that would have been needed to hide cosmonaut deaths in space, that is not theoretical. It existed. It had been tested. It worked for decades at a time. We cannot trust the recordings as evidence. We also cannot trust the Soviet record as complete. These two facts leave us in a place that no documentary about this story wants to sit in, but is the only honest place to be: genuine uncertainty. When the Soviet Union collapsed, historians moved immediately to the archives. For the first time, they could cross-reference official records against classified documents, engineering logs, and internal Communist Party files. What they found: the Soviet space program had more failures than officially acknowledged. Confirmed. Multiple cosmonaut trainees died in accidents during the early program. Bondarenko was one. There were others. Confirmed. Several disasters, including Nedelin, were suppressed for decades. Confirmed. What the archives did not contain: any record of a cosmonaut dying in an actual spaceflight before Gagarin. No mission logs, no engineering postmortems, no classified reports of orbital deaths. James Oberg, a space historian and former NASA engineer who spent years in the post-Soviet archives, concluded, the lost cosmonaut theory as described by the brothers is not supported by the declassified record. But Oberg also notes something important. Not everything was declassified. The Soviet military space program, distinct from the civilian program, has never fully opened its records. Some files were destroyed before anyone could read them. Some remain classified in Moscow today. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially when the institution doing the erasing had 50 years of practice. Achille became a cardiologist, a respected one, a philanthropist. He never stopped believing in the recordings. In interviews across 5 decades, his position never changed. We heard something in 1961. The Soviet Union was hiding something, and the two facts are connected. He died in 2015. The tapes remain in the family's possession. Here is what I can tell you with confidence. The Soviet Union erased people from photographs and from history. Confirmed. The Soviet Union suppressed space disasters for decades. Confirmed. The Soviet Union's military space files have never been fully released. Confirmed. And here is what I cannot tell you. whether anyone died in a Soviet spacecraft before Gagarin lifted off on April 12, 1961, whether the breathing on that February tape was a human being, or a misidentified signal from something else entirely, whether somewhere in an archive that has not yet been opened, or has already been burned, there is a name we have never heard, attached to a mission the world was never meant to know about. We know about Valentin Bondarenko because someone kept a copy of the original photograph, one print, somewhere, that they failed to destroy. A single surviving image that proved a man had been removed from history. The Soviet state was very good at destroying things, but not perfect. Bondarenko never reached space. He died in a training accident on the ground, 3 weeks before the space age officially began. But his erasure tells us something precise. The machine that could remove a human being from a photograph, from official history, from his colleagues' public memories, from his country's own story of itself, that machine was real. It was tested. It was refined. It ran for decades without breaking. If it ran once, on a man who died in a training accident, how many times did it run in the dark? Whether anyone died in a Soviet spacecraft before Gagarin lifted off on April 12, 1961. Whether the breathing on that February tape was a human being, or a misidentified signal from something else entirely. Whether somewhere in an archive that has not yet been opened, or has already been burned, there is a name we have never heard, attached to a mission the world was never meant to know about.